The Shadow over Innsmouth is one of my very favorite H.P. Lovecraft stories. I think it's one of his most iconic, one of his best written, at times one of his scariest, and also one of his most interesting and radical. And I think most of that comes from the ending. But, unfortunately, I also think that because it is so radical, a lot of people misinterpret it and end up reading it as something a lot more conventional than it actually is. Before I proceed, I would like to credit Mr. Jim Moon of the Hypnogoria podcast. His interpretation of the story really shaped what I'm about to say, and he really helped me to realize that a lot of people have this story all wrong. Now, the most common interpretation I see online a lot is that this story is a warning about the dangers of miscegenation. And if you go into the story being told that's what it's about, that may be all you see, and you may miss all the ways that it's really not that at all. It's true that the idea of the Innsmouth people representing race mixing is something the book brings up, and then immediately discards. But the real thing, beyond the way folks feel, is simply race prejudice. What a lot our New England ships used to have to do with queer ports in Africa, Asia, the South Seas, and everywhere else, and what queer kinds of people they sometimes brought back with them. God knows they've gotten to be about as bad as South Sea cannibals and Guinea savages. All other art objects I had ever seen belonged to some known racial or national stream, or else were consciously modernistic defiances of every recognized stream. This tiara was neither. It clearly belonged to some settled technique of infinite maturity and perfection. Yet that technique was utterly remote from any, Eastern or Western, ancient or modern, which I had ever heard of or seen exemplified. His oddities certainly did not look Asiatic, Polynesian, Levantine, or Negroid, yet I could see why the people found him alien. I myself would have thought of biological degeneration rather than alienage. Now let's get this out of the way right now, because apparently it is impossible to have a conversation about Lovecraft without addressing this. Yeah, he was pretty racist. Nobody is denying that. But that does not mean that everything he wrote was about the fact that he was racist. After all, Roald Dahl wrote many, many beloved novels, and only one of them was about blood libel. As we saw last year, when we read In the Walls of Eryx, H.P. Lovecraft's racism was not static throughout his life.
Let us leave to Venus that which belongs only to Venus. As the end approaches, I feel more kindly toward the things. In the scale of cosmic entity, who can say which species stands higher or more nearly approaches a space-wide organic norm? Theirs or mine?
He wrote The Shadow over Innsmouth at a time when his political views were undergoing a massive leftward shift, and a lot of his views on race relaxed quite a bit moving into the 1930s. My point is that, yeah, he was racist, but he was not the one-dimensional racist caricature we often see him as. And the more you look at the actual text of the story, the less it supports that racist interpretation. Most adaptations or derivative works will show the Deep Ones as predominantly male and going after our virtuous, innocent, white, human women, leaning into either the racist fear of, you know,
hey, where are the white women at?
Or just the basic B-movie imagery of monster-carrying woman. But in the actual story, every single human Deep One pairing we hear about is a male human and a female Deep One. So what we're seeing here is people deliberately getting details of the story wrong to better fit a preconceived interpretation. Gotta just hammer that round peg into that square hole somehow. Alan Moore fascinates me because he is obviously a very attentive reader, but he is one of the most media illiterate people I have ever read. I don't think he's ever understood a single book. Then again, maybe I'm being unfair, because I think the sexual assault scenes in Neonomicon have less to do with Lovecraft and more to do with the fact that Alan Moore just really likes sexual assault scenes. And the final chapter in particular kind of goes out of its way to make the Deep Ones awesome. They live forever, they're really smart, they have a booming artistic tradition, the ancient past is within living memory for them, and if you become one of them, you don't have to work a crappy desk job. My father secured me a place in an insurance office, and I buried myself in routine as deeply as possible. Joining the Deep Ones at the end of the story is everything that the main character needs and wants. So, if Deep One hybridization is supposed to represent race mixing, then Lovecraft must have been really in favor of race mixing. And he was not. Let's be clear about that. I don't want to overstate the extent of Lovecraft's progressivism. Now, I've heard that this story was at least partly inspired by Lovecraft learning that he had a little bit of Welsh ancestry. So it is both very dramatic and very funny if the fish monsters are supposed to be a metaphor for the Welsh. Though admittedly, they do create very good art and live deep below sea level. But, like the guy in the story, Lovecraft clearly found a way to make peace with not being entirely Anglo-Saxon. Because he did not kill himself and lived another 8 years or so until he died of cancer. So, what are the Deep Ones, then? Well, Zadok Allen compares them to mermaid legends. I think that's a very good start. Lovecraft really liked to reinvent and put his own spin on classic monster mythologies. He did that with witches in Dreams in the Witch House. He did that with vampires in The Shunned House. So what I think he's doing here is reimagining mermaids in a cosmic horror light. But they do also represent a kind of transcendence. A transcendence of normalcy. Something that is scary at first, but that you gradually get used to and becomes more tolerable over time. The tense extremes of horror are lessening, and I feel queerly drawn toward the unknown sea deeps instead of fearing them. Lovecraft, for all that he was a reactionary, was very much an outsider, and it seems like he was okay with that. From some of his other writings, I think it's very clear that he could see the joy in being an outsider.
Now, I ride with the mocking and friendly ghouls on the night wind, and play by day amongst the catacombs of Nefren Ka, in the sealed and unknown valley of Hadoth by the Nile. I know that light is not for me, save that of the moon over the rock tombs of Neb, nor any gaiety save the unnamed feasts of Nitocris beneath the great pyramid. Yet in my new wildness and freedom, I almost welcome the bitterness of alienage. For although Nepenthe has calmed me, I know always that I am an outsider, a stranger in this century, and among those who are still men.
So now we have to ask, are the Deep Ones even evil? And I'm not sure they are. Yeah, they're weird and icky, but they seem very forgiving of the narrator for all the trouble he puts them through. For bringing the Upper Earthmen's death, I must do a penance, but that would not be heavy. It's true that they seem to work for Cthulhu, but they don't seem all that enthusiastic about it. For the present, they would rest, but someday, if they remembered, they would rise again for the tribute great Cthulhu craved. That is my favorite line of the story, by the way, just brilliant stuff. There you go, they don't want us dead, they think we're hot. And this is why I firmly believe that the main character in Shadow over Innsmouth is not going mad at the end of the story. There's a common interpretation that he's losing his mind, or that this is the Deep One DNA turning him evil or something like that. I don't buy it. Narratively, I think it makes perfect sense that he willingly, deliberately, and in full control of his faculties chose to accept himself. And once again, he does bring up the possibility that he might be going crazy, and then he discards it. Perhaps it is madness that is overtaking me, yet perhaps a greater horror, or a greater marvel, is reaching out. This is how the writer tells you this isn't happening. It is true that Lovecraft did occasionally end a story by driving his protagonist insane, but when he did that, it tended to be written more like this. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window! Madness rides the star wind, claws and teeth sharpened on centuries of corpses, dripping death astride a bacchanal of bats from night-black ruins of buried temples of Belial. And less in the lucid, complete sentences you see here. I shall plan my cousin's escape from that Canton madhouse, and together we shall go to marvel-shadowed Innsmouth. We shall swim out to that brooding reef in the sea, and dive down through black abysses to Cyclopean and many-columned Yanthlay. And in that lair of the Deep Ones, we shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. I guess you can still argue that he is losing his mind, but you could make that claim about really the ending of any book. The point is, I think, that he is making a choice here. Not to kill himself, but to go on living. As a monster, if that's how it's gotta be. And isn't it just so much more interesting if he makes that choice of his own free will? Isn't dismissing that choice as, oh well, he's going insane, just the most boring possible reading of the story? As always, the Mutant Museum would like to thank its incredibly generous sponsors, whose names will be moving up your screen right now. Particular thanks to Andre D., Banana Fish, Metamorph, Michael Fattori, Wafgwen, and Zanazira. Next week, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, not completely unprecedented. We're going to be reading some poetry. And then, let's see, we've got some Hypnogoria coming up. We're going to get back into that. And we're going to wrap up Bill the Blighted in time for Halloween. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and thanks for being you.